Hello and welcome to Dr. Poole's SharePoint surgery session, Create Case Management Solutions using SharePoint. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. You're welcome to submit questions at any time using the chat window on your screen. We'll address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. If you're interested in trying out the enterprise version of Harmony, please send us a request in the chat window and someone will contact you after the webinar to get you started. If we don't manage to answer all of your questions, we'll follow up with you via email and we'll make a recording of the webcast available within a couple of days. It's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker, Richard Poole, Chief Technology Officer of EMEA at Harmony. Richard heads up the pre-sales team for Harmony across the EMEA and Asia Pacific regions, working both directly with key accounts as well as Harmony's partner channel. Bringing with him 18 years of experience in data management systems, Richard has helped many companies to realize the significant benefits in productivity that collaborative platforms enable. Before joining Harmony in 2011, Richard worked for Dassault Systems PLM for over 10 years. Richard also has a Bachelor of Engineering degree in Automotive Engineering from Loughborough University. Richard, please get us started.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome everyone. So today's session, we're focusing on case management, and that's kind of quite a general term for quite a few different use cases, really. Kind of pulling together everything that relates to a particular incident, a particular case, or a particular matter, for example. And there's a number of examples where, a business needs to be able to manage everything that relates to a case together, whether that's documentation or communication or advice or claims or those kind of things. So, as I say, a few examples of those are obviously legal matters. So law firms that are dealing with client cases, court cases and things, but also legal departments within other organizations. I think there's many different industries where an organization will have its own legal department for whatever reason. And so managing everything around any kind of legal case or contract, for example, needs to be managed together effectively. Insurance or reinsurance is another example, where people are putting together specific policies, but also managing the claims around those, and also the kind of assessment of risk for a particular client as well. We've got various examples of customers that are using Harmony to actually manage cases with SharePoint in each of these as well. So insurance, we've got people like Swiss Re who are managing their risk assessment policies and claims using SharePoint with Harmony in conjunction together. Also financial services, where you're giving advice to people, is very crucial, because the advice that you give needs to be obviously traceable and managed. It may need to be kind of countersigned by a colleague before it can be given as impartial advice and those kind of things. So another example of where we've got a customer around utilizing Harmony for that is Aon Hewitt, for example. And also tax advice. Everybody has to go through the whole kind of tax and audit procedures to operate their business. And we've got some very large implementations of tax advice and tax document management systems at the likes of Ernst & Young, who have deployed Harmony with SharePoint together for between 30 and 40,000 tax advisors worldwide. Oops, sorry, I've gone the wrong way there.
So let's start out with asking you the question, how are you currently managing cases? Are you managing them in SharePoint? Are you using public folders and share drives. Maybe you're using a different off-the-shelf document management system or a bespoke system, or you're just looking for a new solution. So we'll give you just a little bit of time to answer that. And I think we're going to let you look at we're going to post the results. Richard, here you go.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Susan, and thanks everyone for responding and taking part in the poll. So we can see that certainly just over a third of the audience are using SharePoint to manage their cases. And it looks like some people not far behind with public folders and shared drives. And I think a lot of people have been doing that in the past, but there are, let's say, limitations with both public folders and shared drives. And a lot of people are looking to move from those into SharePoint. So let's take a look at what the challenges are around managing cases, and then we can take a look at what a potential solution might look like. So the first challenge is that there's generally a lot of communication, and backwards and forwards, whether it's discussing a case, whether it's giving advice, you're responding to a client or whatever. And most of that is done by email. So there's a lot of emails going backwards and forwards. It's generally tied up in people's personal mailboxes. So it's then very difficult to have an easy view of who said what and when and why around a particular case. So having a central place to manage all that communication and capture it together in context is something that is definitely a big challenge. Also, it's not just emails that are going around, it's documentation as well, whether it's a form that needs to be completed, whether it's a letter, whether it's a piece of advice or something. There's lots of different documents going around, and there's lots of different iterations of those documents. And they could be, sent by email as attachments, but they also may be stored on file shares and things like that. So again, putting those all together in one place is a real challenge. I think the key thing that the end user needs is really a single system that they actually spend all their time in. Obviously, like in certain industries, you may have something like a CRM system, which is kind of like your main kind of line of business system that you start up every day and you do all your work in. But I think around particularly about kind of case management, because there's lots of emails going around, because there's lots of documentation, the end users actually spend most of their time in their email client. It's the one application that they open first thing in the morning and keep open most of the day. And also, typically, most advisors, most legal staff are not just working on one case at a time, but they are working on multiple cases. But they need a focused view of these are the cases that I'm actually working on right at the moment. Let's have a look at whether SharePoint is the best solution for that, because obviously SharePoint is a great platform. Lots of companies already have SharePoint to some degree, whether it's just for an intranet or document management collaboration. Being able to utilize that for a more specific need it would be a key benefit. But I think what a lot of people have come from is they may have come from like a kind of bespoke system around case management or matter management, for example, that is generally pretty tightly integrated to the email client, because again, that's the way that people are communicating and advice is coming in and going out. And where SharePoint doesn't natively have that tight integration to Outlook, there's a big gap. If people have to switch to a web interface in order to get some content into SharePoint and get content out and then save it locally and then attach it to an email or whatever, it's very difficult to have a consistent way of working. So I think on its own, SharePoint isn't that single interface that people need to use on a day-to-day basis around case management. However, it's a great platform, as I say. Like IT are generally really happy with the way that it's structured. You can do a lot of things with SharePoint. You can customize it in a lot of different ways. And potentially you can have everything in a single place. So you can search for content easily from a single repository. You can store your documents, your emails, your tasks and things all in one place, in one single platform. And you can use, obviously, the power of metadata to organize and categorize your content and relate things together in that kind of single platform. So the missing element really is getting SharePoint into your email client. And that's where Harmony comes into play, because with a combination of Outlook, Harmony, and SharePoint, you can build a complete solution around your case management or matter management. So let's take a look at what that looks like in practice. So I'm just going to switch to my Outlook interface. And we can see here that Harmony is basically a sidebar on the right-hand side of my Outlook. So while I'm reading my emails, I can still be taking a look at all my matters or all my cases that I'm managing and working on, along with all the metadata and the organization of how that's been organized. So I can easily just navigate around my SharePoint sites. We've got the concept of favorites. So for example, here, I've got different views. Maybe I want to go to a specific case that I'm working on, and nice and easily, and I can move between those very simply as well. So there's different ways that you can manage your content in SharePoint, and different customers take different approaches. I think based on the requirements that they have, content could be organized by folders. It's not the best use of SharePoint, I have to say, but if the client has come from a folder structure in a file share, for example, folders are quite natural to those end users, and obviously you can bulk import and all those kind of things, the folder structures. However, there's much better ways to organize your content in SharePoint, utilizing document libraries, for example, and lists, sites or subsites and site collections, but also document sets is a great way to organize content, because you can group together the content that you need, but you can apply metadata to an entire document set, and then everything within that document set will inherit the metadata from the set. But also you can utilize different metadata around each of these as well. So the great news is that Harmony supports all of these different approaches on how you can organize your content. So let's just take a look at a few examples of that. So here we can see that I'm actually working in a library that's organized by document sets, and I've got a number of different views there. So I can easily move between, looking at my content as document sets, or I could see information grouped by different properties, different content and metadata. But also I could go to some other areas in my SharePoint where content is being organized by, for example, folders. If I go to this particular document library here, you'll see that I've got a folder structure that I can go and work with, and I can drill down to the content and find and work as I need to. I can also navigate around with, for example, a tree structure on the right-hand side here as well. So I can move between my cases. I can navigate around my SharePoint content nice and easily. So for example, here I could have a folder per client. If we just go back to where we were working before, and you'll see that I can hold down the back button and see the history of actually everywhere we've been working in so far. So if I go to, let's say, this particular document set here, as I say, we can utilize the views that are configured there as well. So if I want to see, for example, just the email content in this library that's been organized by the actual subject or the original subject of the email within the case, then I can easily organize my content nice and straightforward. So Harmony, as I say, supports all the different approaches that you may have to organizing your content in SharePoint. So you don't necessarily have to change the way your SharePoint is structured to work with Harmony. Harmony can work with how you need to structure your content. So how should you categorize your data? There's a number of different ways to do this as well. And you can also, I mean, we've touched on a little bit using views, for example, to represent the same metadata or the same content in different ways. So when you're actually saving content, you can easily be applying the metadata, which could be driving a view, but you can also update multiple items at the same time. So again, let's take a look at an example of that. So for example here, if I've got, let's say, this email that relates to a particular case, if I drag and drop that email into the sidebar, it then allows me to fill in all the metadata that relates to that particular item. So here, for example, we've got document type and document security. So security here is a property which is actually driving that view that we were just looking at. So anything that's required is highlighted with a red dot that you'll notice on here. And just for simplicity for end users, if I want to filter that down just to show the required properties, make it easier for the end user to populate the things that they need to populate, we can do that as well. So I can say, okay, this is a claim analysis document and it's a sensitive document as well. So then when I save that document there, or this email, for example, we can see that actually there's a new item in this view. The view has been updated, but also if I go to, let's say, the view that's being grouped by security level here, we can see that document there is nice and easily organized. Now that really takes people away from having to use folders to organize their content, because I can look at the same information in a number of different ways. And I can easily navigate around that as well. But also, I can actually view the content that we're capturing in a nice, easy way. So whether that's an email or a document that I actually select, I don't necessarily have to open up the document itself. But if I do need to open the email, then I can simply just double click on that and I can reply to it in the future. So I can actually collaborate with my colleagues around both the documentation that relates to this particular case, as well as the emails that are being captured as well. Now we're also focusing here on a document set. I think that's the most common use case around organizing cases and matters as from experience. So if we actually just go up a level there and take a look at the document sets in this particular library, we can see that not only can I view the document set itself, but also I can actually edit the properties from here as well. So you'll see here, like the common properties that are then being inherited by any of the content. So for example, if I update this policy number to say this information, maybe I want to update some other properties as well, and Harmony supports all the different metadata fields that you've defined in your SharePoint environment as well. So if I need to change this from Fred to Annie, let's say, I can search for my users in my organization and assign that there. So we support all the different people picker fields and manage metadata and enterprise keywords and things like that. So now if I go into that document set and select a document or upload, let's say, a piece of content. So let's take this claim summary, and you see that I can drag and drop both attachments and emails in the same kind of way. So Actually, let's just take this one. You'll see now that the properties from the document set are actually being inherited automatically. So now I can say that this is an external report, and let's say it's not sensitive. I can also, as we mentioned here, update multiple items at the same time, which I didn't actually just show just a second ago. So let's go back and do that. And let's go to, let's say, a different matter or case. And you'll see now that, for example, I can take multiple items, let's say taking these few documents, and I can edit the properties on all of the items that I've selected. So now, if I want to change maybe the confidentiality of these two documents, I can do that. It's going to check those items out, make that change to those items that I've selected, and you can see that they're organized and updated accordingly. So with that, would I like to ask another question?
So if you are using SharePoint, how are you organizing your documents today? And maybe like Richard, you are using more than one of these systems. Are you using document sets, folders, meta-driven views, libraries, or you aren't using SharePoint yet to organize your documents? I think, Richard, you're using the first four.
Yeah.
But we'll see what today's viewers are doing. So let's post this so you can all see.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you everyone for participating. And actually, in some ways, surprisingly, but not surprisingly, just over half of everyone is using folder structures in SharePoint. I completely understand why. Generally, it's come from kind of legacy ways of working. But I think, people are moving towards using kind of metadata views, document sets and things as well. And as I say, Harmony does support all of those. And, there are obviously clear limitations on using folders, but if that's how users are kind of used to working, then that's certainly a viable option. So I think, not only capturing the content, but also collaborating with both your colleagues and your clients is the next challenge, really, because obviously there's a lot of communication going backwards and forwards with your clients. How do I actually send documentation to people? How do I capture the documents that they've been sending me? And how do I capture the emails and things? So we've touched a little bit on kind of like dragging an email in and saving that, dragging a document in and saving that. But let's take a look at like actually kind of a workflow of how do if I've received an email and I need to capture it, what happens with that, and how do I go through that process? So let's say that actually I'm just going to go to a different library for the purposes of this demonstration. And let's take a document library that I've been working in. And here I'm just going to create a folder for this client. So let's say client 1. Given that the majority of people are using folder structures. So now I'm working with this client, and they've maybe sent me some evidence, maybe in an email or whatever. Now I need to capture that email, and as we saw before, I can simply drag and drop that email into the right-hand side, or I can say I want to save that message using the contextual menu, or I can use, for example, the ribbon controls here, and we can even suggest locations for you to save those emails as well, based on the locations, the folders that you're using. And for example, we can identify topics from emails. Now, I'm not going to focus too much on the kind of topics interface on today's session. We've done many other sessions around that as well. So please feel free to take a look at some of our other recorded webinars. But here we can identify, for example, keywords and topics from the email that you've selected. And based on those topics, actually suggest or recommend locations that you may want to save that email to. But also, obviously, I can drag and drop content directly into the sidebar. So let's do that with a couple of examples. So here I'm saving an email, and I can do this en masse as well. So I can take multiple items, save them all in one go. And you'll see here, it's actually setting the content type for the email. And therefore using specific metadata. So things like the subject, who the email was sent to, who it was sent from, when it was sent, all those kind of things are being automatically populated by Harmony. Also, the email has been marked in my Outlook as being saved to SharePoint, and even the location of that is indicated here. So that email is then stored as a fully contained MSG file. As I say, it's extracting the header information, and for example, I may have some views configured there as well. So even within a folder, we can utilize metadata and views too. So here we can see that in this email view, I'm just focusing on the email content in this library, and it's showing me the subject of the email, when it was sent, who it was sent to, who it was sent from, and all that kind of information. Now also, I may have been sent some documentation by email as well. So I can take attachments in the same way, like we saw before, and drag and drop those into the library. Now in this instance, I have multiple content types defined, and therefore different metadata and things as well. So here, I'm going to save this maybe as a claim summary, so I'll put it in as a report. And then there'll be corresponding metadata for that particular item that I put into SharePoint. Again, we can fill in all the metadata as we saw before, all different types of properties and things. So what we can also do is now if I need to actually send some content to somebody, I can do that in a few different ways. So, for example, here I've been working on this claim summary, and now I need to send that to somebody. So I can work on it directly from the sidebar. I can check in, check out, approve, reject, all those kind of things. But now I want to send it to the client. So I can do that just by composing a new email, for example. And I'm going to send this to, let's say, Susan. And because Harmony is available in my email messages as well as my inbox, it means that I can actually interact with the email itself. So let's say, hi Susan, please fill in the attached form. And then I can simply attach that document to the email, or I can send it as a link. So if I just drag that into my email there, it's actually going to create a SharePoint link. Now, when Susan receives that email, she can click on it and open it up from SharePoint. But also, when I send this email, I can check whether Susan has something. Let me just send that, sorry. I can check whether Susan actually has access to that link. Now, in this case, Susan could be a client, so she doesn't have access to my SharePoint. Now, I can either grant her access or I can send it as an attachment. So in this case, I do need to send it as an attachment. So I can do that just by holding down the Alt key while I drag and drop, and then the document will then be attached to this email, and I can send it on its way to Susan. Now, when I receive that back, and Susan's made some changes, she's filled in that particular document, it might be that she's actually changed the file name of that email. So she's filled it in, saved it locally, and sent it back with a different file name. Now, if I try and save that into SharePoint, it's going to be considered a completely new document, but I actually want to save it as a new version of what I sent out. So I can simply drag and drop the new document on top of the old one, wait for a few seconds, and I can choose to add it as a new revision. So therefore, I can maintain the version history of what's been sent out and when and why. So I have the opportunity now to update, for example, the metadata and things as well. And we now see that we have a number of different versions of that document that have been saved at different times. So I'm not losing the traceability of the changes that I've made, but also the changes that the customer or the client has made as well. So that's working with external people, but also what about working with internal people? Obviously I might be working on a case, but Susan might be a colleague of mine who's also working on the same case. So as we said before, if I need to send a document to somebody, I can send it as a link as well. And when you receive a link from somebody in an email, let's just take an example of that again. Now, in this example, let's say Susan has received this email from me and it's got a link in it. Obviously, I can click on that. It's a SharePoint link. It's nicely formatted, so I can use it in the context of my sentences. And it will open up from SharePoint. Now, if she has Harmony, even if she has Harmony closed, she can right-click on that link that she's been sent and say, open up in Harmony. It will take her directly to that document in the right location so that she can start working on it. And she can even preview it. She could check it out from here. She can see the version history and the properties and things without necessarily having to open the document itself. Because I think one of the challenges when you receive a SharePoint link is if you click on it, it tends to, if it's a link to a document, it will just open the document or try and download it. And that can be confusing to end users. So this makes it really nice and seamless for you and your colleagues to work together. Now also, if I've saved an email, and let's say Susan has also been sent the same email, let's just take this again as an example here, and she tries to save that email there, because we actually create a unique identifier, Harmony knows that it's the same email. And you can see here, based on the file name that's being created, that we're taking the subject of the email, the timestamp and date of when it was sent, and the person who sent the email, so their name. So if a client has sent an email to me and to Susan, both in copy, and we both try and save the same email, basically the first one will save it, and the second one will get a message to say that already exists. I'm just going to cancel that. But also, if I've received another email from the same person relating to the same subject, but at a different time, maybe they sent it the following day because it was a later part of the conversation, then I can save that in as a new item, and it won't be considered a duplicate. Now, one thing is, obviously, we've been working about manually capturing content and saying where I need to save that content to. There's cases where you're getting lots of emails around the same case, and you may need to automate that capture. So Harmony can do that by making SharePoint locations available as Outlook folders that you can then use in rules. So as an example, if we just go up a level here, I've got a library here that's got, let's say, some important emails for a particular client. Or it could be, I've got a library with lots of correspondence here. So here I'm actually automatically capturing the content that relates to specific criteria. And what I can do is I can navigate to a location in Harmony, then I can make that available as a favorite, and Harmony Harmony has a full favorites mechanism so that you can follow for activity, you can easily navigate, but also you can make that location available as an Outlook folder. What that means is that that location is then available in my my inbox. You can see here there's a folder called Harmony with the areas that I've made available for Outlook. And then I can use those in rules. So here I've actually created a rule that says whenever I receive an email that relates to a particular client, in this case Ravenwood, maybe the name is in the subject, maybe it's from a particular email domain or group of users, you can build the logic in the Outlook rule basically to say that this email should get moved or copied, in my case, to this particular library. And now I can see that I've got a different type of view there, which is just grouped on the original subject. We can see that I've actually received a number of different responses from different clients relating to that. So nice, easy way to build your own logic into how to capture and automate the process of that. But also, when I'm capturing emails, wouldn't it be great if we can actually capture some key information from the actual email itself, as well as the header information, but also those topics that I mentioned. I kind of introduced the concept earlier on. So let's just touch on that a bit further, because I think it's a really interesting concept where Harmony has developed a mechanism to actually identify topics from emails that you're selecting. So in this case, let's take this email that relates to a particular client, and there's a number of keywords in that email. Now, Harmony can identify topics from those emails. So in this case, it's identified the account name or the client, the industry that they're in, and a few pieces of information from that. I can add to that as well, and the system can learn from that. So it uses natural language processing to identify those topics and learn from what you're doing. But then what we can do is utilize those topics when I capture the content. So if I just go back to actually where we were working before and work with, let's say, this library here, this client folder. And now I want to capture this email. When I drag and drop that email, you'll see that, like we saw before, it's taking the header information from the email, but it's also going to take those topics that it identified and enter those as metadata in SharePoint. So we can really drive and utilize the taxonomy and folksonomy approaches that you may have implemented or may want to implement in SharePoint. So on that, I think we have a third poll question.
We do. So while you are answering the question on your screen of if you are interested in trying Harmony Enterprise version, and if you're using Harmony at all, let me ask Richard some of the questions that have come in. Richard, if I understand your presentation, email transferred to SharePoint via Harmony moves the Outlook metadata as well, so that you can maintain the conversation threads of the emails?
Yeah, exactly. So as we saw, we can take the kind of header information from the emails, like who it was sent to, who it was sent from, and those kind of things. But also, just as we're seeing here, but also I can take things like, it's a good illustration actually, the conversation topic or the conversation ID. Now I'm just exposing these just for demo purposes, but actually in reality, typically you would have those hidden. But what I can do is I can actually utilize those to actually create views in Harmony as well. So let's just go actually to this document library where there's a bit more content and utilize this kind of conversation view that I've configured. And what this does is it groups together your emails based on, first of all, the subject or the original subject, but then also I can group that further by the person who it was sent to or sent from. So you can have kind of real conversation views defined in SharePoint, displayed in Harmony, and also obviously visible in SharePoint. So if we take a look at, what that looks like in SharePoint, at any point in time, by the way, I can right-click in Harmony and say, open what I'm looking at in a browser. That will then take me directly to that location in SharePoint. And you'll see that the content there is being displayed in that kind of conversation view.
Cool. Okay. The next question is, can I disable the ability to grant permissions when sharing content with another user?
Okay. I think when we kind of sent a link earlier, let's just do that again, because maybe I didn't touch on it in too much detail, because it's an interesting concept. But for example, here, if I wanted to send one of my documents to Susan, let's take this accident document or something, and obviously it's creating a SharePoint link. Now I've actually got it using using some different metadata as the label. It might be the document ID, it might be the title or the name or whatever. So again, if I just drag this document here, we can take that as a better example there. But now if I send that to Susan and we check whether Susan has access to that document, I actually have the ability now, because Susan doesn't have access, to grant her view or edit capability. So I think this is where that question was coming from. These, granting permissions here is really, these are the only permissions that you can grant from Harmony. Everything else is granted in SharePoint. And even this is utilizing your SharePoint configuration. So it's based on the fact that I've got permission to share a document. And I can do that from here. But also I can do that if I just cancel for a second. If I right click on a document and say that I want to share this with somebody, or I can interrogate who it's currently shared with. Again, that's based on the configuration of your SharePoint. So in your environment, you may not have that option in Harmony if it's been disabled in that particular SharePoint instance.
Thank you. I'm going to go with just one more question so we can give people 15 minutes. Can Skype conversations be saved to SharePoint using Harmony?
This is a good question. I mean, we do integrate to Skype from the point of view of, for example, presence awareness and instant messaging and things. So, for example, here, if I can see this, say Sam is offline at the moment, but I can right-click and start an instant message chat with him in Skype for Business or whatever. But also, the kind of conversations that you get from Skype are often kind of emailed to you by Outlook. So, for example, here, if I take a look at my conversation history, I can see I've got some dialogue here with one of my colleagues. And obviously this is actually then stored in Outlook, and I can store that into SharePoint. So if I just drag that into the sidebar, it will then be stored as an MSG file in the same way as an email. And who it was with and who's involved and all that kind of stuff. Again, you can see it's organized by the subject and the sender. I can even preview that directly from there as well.
Excellent. So, Richard, thank you for that wonderful presentation and demonstration. Thank all of you for joining us today. You will receive an email with a link to view the webinar again within a couple of days, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thank you.